All right, so today we are going to learn about Julius Caesar, the Roman Republic, the birth of Christianity, Constantine, and the Roman Empire. So essentially, ancient Rome is what we're going to be talking about today. Now, whenever you think about ancient Rome, probably a lot of different thoughts come into your mind. Maybe take a second here to think about what comes to your mind when you think ancient Rome. Okay, maybe you have the Roman soldiers, with the red feathers on their hat, or maybe the movie Gladiator, or all sorts of other things can come to our mind when we think of ancient Rome. Now, the first thing to know about Rome is that it started as a republic and then it became an empire, and we'll get into that a little bit later. So the culture of the Roman Republic, it was heavily influenced by Greek culture. Okay? It came pretty much right after the age of ancient Greece. In a similar region, the Mediterranean, okay, Rome was centered in Italy, whereas ancient Greece, of course, was centered in modern-day Greece. And Rome was heavily influenced by Greek art and architecture. You see these pictures here of the Parthenon versus the Colosseum of Rome, just very similar structures, right? You have a lot of the same type of art, a lot of the same type of architecture. It's almost indistinguishable. So the Romans borrowed a lot from the Greeks. Also, the class distinctions in the Roman Empire are very important. You have the patricians, who were the elites, like the upper class, the rich people, the royalty, and then you had the plebeians, who was basically everybody else. And the majority of people were plebeians. And those were the class distinctions in the Roman Republic. Now, people had very short life expectancies at this time, around the bridge between BC and AD. That is when people had the shortest life expectancies of any time on Earth. Because before that era, there were fewer diseases that had developed, and then ever since that era, we've had more medicine. So the Roman Republic was right in that middle ground where you had a bunch of diseases that had developed, but not much medicine to cure those diseases. So people had very short life expectancies. Some estimates are as young as 28 was an average life expectancy during this time in Rome. Now, the Roman Republic was governed by a Senate. Okay, we know the term Senate from one we have right here in the United States. It's a body of legislators chosen in America. It's chosen by us, by our vote. But in Rome, it was chosen from a group of elite families. So not really a democracy like you had in Athens and other Greek city-states, but still some power in the hands of the people, and power was dispersed among a body of legislators that were called the Senate. All right, so they're chosen from a group of elite families, and every year the Senate would choose from its body two co-consuls to Rome. All right, so these consuls were kind of like presidents, all right, and you had two of them. And these two rulers checked each other's power. If one of them got too prideful or power hungry, the other one would kind of keep them in check. Also, what usually happened is one co-consul took care of domestic issues, which means things going on inside of Rome itself, like taxes or the people themselves, while the other co-consul usually left and fought wars. And there was a nuclear option, so to speak, in which a dictator could temporarily take over the government if the republic was in, quote, imminent danger. And then after that, he would resign, and then the co-consuls would take over again along with the Senate. So the Roman Republic had a Senate and two co-consuls, but then there was an alternate option in which a dictator could temporarily take over if the government was in imminent danger. Okay, and that comes into play when we talk about Julius Caesar. Now, you might have heard of him. You may have read his play. You might read it this year in English. Very interesting and important historical figure here, Julius Caesar. Now, he is so special for several reasons. First of all, he was born around 100 BC, about 100 years before the birth of Christ, and he was born via what we now know as a C-section, or a Caesarean section, named after him, where you basically cut open the mother's belly and take out the child in that way instead of the child being born naturally. So his birth was kind of a miracle. As far as we know, the first ever C-section birth, which is why it's named after him, a Caesarean section. Then he served in the Roman army, then served in the Senate, and then he was elected as consul in 59 BC. So he kind of worked his way up the ranks. And after his year, remember the consuls only reign for 1 year at a time, after his year as consul, he became a general again. It was what he was good at, and he conquered Gaul, okay, an area called Gaul. And that's basically modern day France, okay, this area right here on the map, conquered by Caesar, this area in the orange. And then a guy named Pompey, who was Caesar's former friend, who became his enemy a little bit later on, we'll get to that. Pompey became consul while Caesar was away. So while Caesar was over here fighting the Gauls and conquering what we now know as France, Pompey was back here in Rome running things. All right, now Pompey tried to take Caesar down by issuing a warrant for his arrest. Okay, he wanted total power, and Caesar was very popular, so Pompey tried to take Caesar down by issuing a warrant for his arrest. This did not work out very well for Pompey, because once Julius Caesar found out about this, he responded by returning to Rome with his army and essentially invaded his hometown. He invaded Rome itself with the intent to kill Pompey, after which Pompey fled the city and Caesar took control of the city of Rome. So by 48 BC, Caesar had taken control of all of Rome and was named both dictator and consul. Remember the nuclear option, to where you could be named as a dictator if the republic was in imminent danger. And Julius Caesar said, hey, this guy just tried to have me arrested for no reason. He was trying to take me down. Obviously, the republic is in imminent danger. That's why we need a dictator. Okay, but he was named as both dictator and consul, so very powerful person at that time. Now, while he was in charge, some of the reforms that Julius Caesar made was first he reformed land ownership laws. It used to be where you could only own land if you were from an elite family like the patricians. He changed it to where even plebeians could now own land, all right, so kind of democratic in that way. He also changed the laws concerning the paying off of debts. A lot of times, if you couldn't pay off your debts, you were made a slave until you could, which of course you'd never be able to if you were a slave, because slaves don't make money. So he changed that a little bit to make it easier, more accessible for people to pay off debts. And then also, most importantly for our purposes, he changed the calendar. And that calendar he changed to what is almost identical to the calendar we use today. It has the 12 months that still go by essentially the same names. It did undergo a slight change in the 500s with a guy named Gregory, so technically we use the Gregorian calendar instead of the Julian calendar, but very, very close to the calendar that Julius Caesar made at during his time as ruler of Rome. But then on what became known as the Ides of March, which was March 15th, a group of senators, remember the Senate still has some power, a group of senators decided that Caesar had become too powerful. All right, they said, we need to take care of him. We need to restore the Roman Republic to where we have 1 year co-consuls instead of having emperors that would be corrupted by too much power. Because remember, before Caesar, you had 2 co-consuls and a senate. And the co-consuls only served for 1 year, and then they stepped down. But whenever Julius Caesar took control after driving out Pompey from Rome, he became both consul, the only consul, and dictator. And his reign was not for 1 year, but for many years. Okay? He never had any intention to step down. So on the Ides of March, or March 15th of 44 BC, this group of senators killed Caesar by stabbing him 23 times on the floor of the Roman Senate. Very dramatic scene in history depicted in this painting right here. If you ever read the play Julius Caesar, there's a very famous line where Caesar speaks in Latin as he's being stabbed, and he says, "Et tu, Brute," which means "even you, Brutus." There's a guy named Marcus Brutus who was pretty much Caesar's closest friend, yet he was one of the people who stabbed Caesar to death. All right, so Caesar was stabbed 23 times on the floor of the Roman Senate. The senators believed that they were doing the right thing by killing him, because doing so, they thought, would restore the Roman Republic, and they would have 1 year co-consuls and wouldn't have one person with too much power anymore now that Julius Caesar is out of the picture. Okay, so that is what they hoped, but that is not what happened, not at all. And the reason why that didn't happen at all is because most people liked Julius Caesar. He was very, very popular among the people, something that the senators didn't really take into account when they plotted his murder. People liked his reforms. Okay, they kind of liked not having to pay off all of their debts or else go into slavery. They liked being able to own land. And therefore, instead of going back to the co-consul system after Caesar's death, the people elected his adopted son, Octavian, as the new emperor. Okay, and he became known as Caesar Augustus. All right. So basically, this firmly established the Roman Empire and made the Roman Republic obsolete. Okay, differences between empires and republic. Usually, empires are ruled by just one person, and republics are ruled by many. Okay, so the United States is a republic, whereas Rome had traded the republic for the empire at this time. So really, the senators brought to fruition the exact opposite of what they wanted to accomplish in killing Caesar, because by killing Caesar, it firmly established the Roman Empire because people missed him and wanted another Caesar. All right, and that became known as basically the king or the emperor or ruler of all of Rome. Now, the state of the Roman Empire, which had now been established after Julius Caesar's death, Emperor Octavian changed his name to Caesar Augustus. You may have heard that name. He is mentioned in the Bible in Luke chapter 2, where it says, "And it came to pass that in those days Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken over the entire Roman world." So Caesar Augustus was a very influential emperor. He ruled from 27 BC through 14 AD. Okay, so he kind of bridged the gap there, and he was the emperor of Rome when Jesus was born. As I said, he's mentioned in the book of Luke. So the line of Roman emperors continued after Augustus's death until the fall of the Roman Empire in 476 AD. As you see in that picture there, that is a picture of all of the Roman emperors from Caesar Augustus all the way until the fall of the Roman Empire more than 400 years later. All right, so the empire had firmly been established and the Roman Republic was long gone with Julius Caesar's murder. All right, so now moving into the birth of Christianity, the world's largest religion. And we're also going to talk about Constantine and the state of the Roman Empire in the AD era, after Julius Caesar and after Caesar Augustus. All right, so Jesus of Nazareth, most historians believe that Jesus was born around 4 BC. That's kind of confusing, right? You'd think it would be 1 AD, right? Because AD means in the year of our Lord. And that is when people believed he was born, several hundred years ago. But these days, archaeologists and historians say that our best guess is that Jesus was born in the year 4 BC. So there was no year 0, but he was born around 4 BC in a region called Judea, okay, and that is present-day Israel. Remember talking about the kingdoms of Israel and Judah? Well, this was named after the kingdom of Judah, Judea, right here, with the city of Jerusalem as its capital. So Jesus was crucified in Jerusalem in the year 30 AD, after which Christianity began to spread. And the person who was responsible for spreading Christianity throughout Judea and Samaria, if you go back to the map, Samaria, this land to the north of Judea, okay, so throughout this entire area is where Christianity first spread. And the people responsible for spreading it were Jesus' followers. He had several disciples during his earthly ministry who followed him around and learned from his teachings, traveled with him, and after Jesus' death, most of them traveled around the Roman Empire and spread the gospel. All right. So first they started in Judea and Samaria and eventually spread all throughout the Roman world. Now, many of them were martyred for their faith. To be martyred, which that means to be killed for a religious reason. Okay, so a lot of them were martyred for their faith because the Roman Empire saw Christianity as a threat and they refused to deny the gospel. And then comes a very important person named Saul of Tarsus. Okay, he was also known as Paul. He wrote 13 books of the New Testament in the Bible. His Hebrew name was Saul, and his Greek name was Paul. Okay, so there's no time where his name changed. That was always his name. All right, so Paul was a Jewish convert to Christianity in the 1st century AD. Now, before his conversion to Christianity, he was a Jewish scholar, lived in Jerusalem, and therefore he knew the Old Testament very, very well. And so after his conversion, he spent several years kind of in the desert re-studying the Old Testament and relearning the scriptures as a Christian, because Jewish people read the Old Testament much differently than Christians do, because Christians see the Old Testament as leading to Jesus, whereas Jewish people do not. All right, so he spent his time restudying the Old Testament, and then after that, he went on to spread Christianity throughout the entire Roman Empire. Now, one big reason why Paul was able to do this was because he was a Roman citizen. Now, that was very rare for a Jew. So he was both Jewish and a Roman citizen. Okay, it wasn't like if you lived in this area in the orange, you were a Roman citizen. No, no, no. You had to be born into an elite family, or you had to pay a lot of money to become a Roman citizen. So, for example, Jesus was not a Roman citizen. He was just a regular Jew who lived in Judea. Okay, in the sense politically, as far as citizenship, he wasn't special in that way. Okay, but Paul had Roman citizenship and therefore was allowed to travel freely throughout the entire empire. If you didn't have citizenship, it was like not having a passport. You couldn't travel to different corners of the empire. But since Paul was a Roman citizen, he was allowed to travel freely through the empire. So after becoming a Christian, that's exactly what Paul did. He devoted his entire life to traveling around the entire Roman Empire spreading the gospel. So he showed people that you did not have to be circumcised or to be of Jewish heritage to follow Christ, which is what a lot of people originally thought. Since the Old Testament talks of circumcision and Jesus himself was Jewish, a lot of people thought, well, you have to be Jewish or you have to be circumcised in order to be a Christian. But Paul said, no, 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 you don't have to. It's open to people of all races, all ethnicities. So he kind of opened up the faith for thousands, if not millions of people. And Christianity just spread rapidly throughout the entire Roman Empire because of that. Paul took at least 3 missionary journeys, they're called. Here's the map of his first one. All right, so starting around here, okay, he traveled through modern-day Turkey into 4 cities, Antioch, Iconium, Lystra, and Derbe, and then kind of went back to this area of Antioch and then down to Jerusalem again. His second missionary journey was more extensive. Not only did he travel through modern-day Turkey and or Asia Minor, as it was called back then, and revisit those cities, but he also visited these areas in Greece, including Athens, which we've talked about, okay, some other prominent cities like Corinth and Thessalonica and Philippi, all right, all of those sorts of areas. His third missionary journey was very similar, all right, just basically spreading the gospel through that region. And then afterwards, he took a trip to Rome itself. So after spreading the gospel throughout this entire area in the Mediterranean, he took a trip to Rome. And in fact, that is where he died. He was beheaded, also martyred for his faith, but pretty much spread the gospel throughout that entire region before he was killed. All right, so the Roman government saw Christianity as a threat to their authority, and therefore they made it illegal to be a Christian. Okay, so that's why Paul and most of Jesus' disciples were martyred for their faith. And this happened to a lot of Christians in Rome, not just ones who knew Jesus personally, but anyone who confessed a faith in him. A lot of them were killed. So thousands of Christians still practiced their faith in secret throughout the empire. A lot of them went underground into places called catacombs, which you can see in the picture right here. They had to worship in secret because it was illegal to be a Christian. And the secret symbol of Christianity was called the ichthus, all right? And that's this fish right here. Nowadays we know it as the Jesus fish. You might see it on cars or trucks, okay? You see the Jesus fish a lot. It's called the ichthus, all right? And it started as a secret symbol. What people would do is if they weren't sure whether or not you were a Christian, if you could talk about your faith in Jesus, what they would do is they would draw half of this fish in the sand or in the dirt, wherever they were, and then if the other person was a Christian, they would make that symbol and complete the fish there, okay? So that was a way, kind of a coded message by saying, okay, we're both Christians. We can talk openly. I know you're not going to report me to the emperor, and I know I'm not going to get killed for talking about my faith with you. All right, so that was the secret symbol of Christianity during the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd centuries AD. So during that time, even though most Christians worshipped in secret, still thousands of them were caught and killed for being Christians, for worshiping. And some of them notoriously were fed to the lions in the Roman Colosseum. Okay, you see this painting right here of the lions being released. Basically, Christians were arrested and then put into this Colosseum, which was like a big theater, and thousands of people would come and watch the Christians just get devoured by the lions. Just so barbaric to think that anyone would want to watch something like that, even if you didn't agree with their faith. But that is what happened to thousands of Christians during the Roman Empire. Now, something called the Pax Romana occurred at this time. And the Pax Romana, which basically means Roman peace, was during the 1st and 2nd centuries AD. Okay, so throughout the 100s. And this was a time of relative social stability and economic prosperity. Now, it doesn't mean that there was total peace and no violence. Obviously, there was violence. We just talked about Christians being devoured by lions and being killed for their faith and things like that. So there was violence during the Pax Romana, but there were very few wars, and it was relatively stable in the region. Okay, it was a time of relative peace and prosperity in the Roman Empire. So this allowed people like Paul to travel across borders and to spread their faith. If the Roman Empire had been in a huge war during the 1st century AD, Paul, even though he was a Roman citizen, would not have been able to travel between borders like that. It just wouldn't have been able to happen because they would have been at war. So the fact that Rome wasn't in many wars at the time, in addition to Paul being a citizen, that is one big reason why he was able to spread the faith so much. And also, a large number of martyrdoms during this time made Christianity spread faster as well. Now, you might think that, oh man, killing Christians and making them martyrs, wouldn't that lead to a decline in Christianity because people don't want to get killed? And you might think that, but actually it led to the numbers increasing because people started seeing this and saying, oh my goodness, these people believe in this guy Jesus so much that they're willing to die, even to be devoured by lions. That's how much they believe in this faith, in this religion. Maybe I should give this a second look. So it made Christianity spread faster. And that is not what the Romans wanted, but that is what happened with all of the martyrdoms. Now, the time when the Roman Empire was at its greatest territorial extent, when it was the absolute largest, was in the year 117 AD. And if you look at this map, it is just astounding how large the empire had gotten. Similar to the time of Alexander the Great. Just so much land under the rule of one person, the Caesar, the emperor. So the Roman Empire at this time contained 25% of the world's population. However, remember, as we've talked about before, a lot of times, especially in ancient times before modern technology, the larger your empire got, the weaker it also got. So yes, this was the height of the Roman Empire territorially, but eventually it gets really difficult to govern that large of an area of land. And that is one of the big reasons why Rome fell, why the Roman Empire didn't last forever, because they spread themselves too thin. And that's one big reason there. And we'll get to the fall of Rome next class. Now, some of the most significant Roman emperors of the 1st and 2nd centuries, first of all, you have Julius Caesar's adopted son, Octavian, who renamed himself Caesar Augustus. He established the principles of dynastic succession before he died. So we talked about dynasties when we talked about China, but most monarchies have a dynastic system, dynastic succession. Your son becomes emperor when you die, or your nephew if you don't have a son, or something like that. So Caesar Augustus's heirs during the 1st century included many emperors, including Tiberius, Claudius, and Nero. Now, Nero was probably the most infamous one for killing Christians. He was also believed to be mentally insane and he actually set fire to Rome and blamed the Christians on it, blamed the Christians for it. Okay, so a lot of crazy things about Nero, some not so great emperors during this time. In the 2nd century, you had an emperor named Marcus Aurelius, and he became famous because not only was he an emperor, but he was also a philosopher. He became famous for his philosophical writings, had a lot of wise things to say. And then his successor, Commodus, took the throne in 180 AD, and most historians consider Commodus's reign as kind of the beginning of the end of Rome. Okay, so kind of marked the descent of Rome from a kingdom of gold into one of rust and iron. That's a famous historical quote there. So Rome started to slowly decline after Marcus Aurelius when his son Commodus took the throne. If you've ever seen the movie Gladiator, you see some of that. Now, not everything in that movie is historically accurate, but it does talk about Marcus Aurelius, and then Commodus is a main character as well. So that kind of marked the descent of Rome from an empire of gold into one of rust and iron, and slowly from that point on, Rome began to get weaker and weaker. And then finally, okay, the one person we need to know about was Constantine the Great. Okay, so Constantine the Great was a Roman general who was crowned emperor actually way outside of the city of Rome itself in York, England, in northern England. And he was crowned emperor after his father's death in 306 AD. Now you see that picture right there. I lived in England for a little while and visited the cathedral where Constantine was crowned emperor, and there's me next to a statue of him. Really cool statue, really cool that I got to see that. But Constantine, who we'll talk about next class, changed the Western world more than probably any man in all of history. And we'll get into the reasons why next class. Okay? As always, just let me know if you have any questions or anything that I can re-explain for you.